The biting wind whipped across the barren, rocky expanse of the northern frontier, carrying with it the scent of pine and an undeniable chill that seeped into the very bones. It was a land of harsh beauty, where jagged peaks clawed at a perpetually overcast sky and ancient glaciers carved deep scars into the earth. Life here was a struggle, a constant test of endurance against the elements and the unseen dangers lurking in the shadows. Corporal Elias Vance, a young scout barely out of his teens, moved through this unforgiving terrain with a practiced, almost silent grace. His footsteps left barely a print on the frozen ground, his movements as fluid and economical as the wolves that roamed these desolate lands. He was a creature of the wildlands, his senses honed to an almost preternatural degree, capable of detecting the subtle shift in a breeze, the faint scent of disturbed earth, the distant cry of a bird signaling unseen movement. While his fellow soldiers huddled around crackling fires in their temporary bivouacs, seeking warmth and camaraderie, swapping crude jokes and wistful tales of home, Elias often gravitated towards the periphery. He preferred the quiet companionship of the ancient. Gnarled trees that clung tenaciously to the mountainsides, their branches skeletal against the sky, and the whispering wind that carried secrets across vast distances. He was a solitary figure. His innate talent for reading the nuanced language of the land, a skill often misinterpreted by his peers. They saw his quietude as detachment, his meticulous observations as oddities, his preference for solitude as a sign of unsociability. He wasn't overtly unfriendly, but he simply operated on a different frequency, one attuned to the subtle vibrations of the earth rather than the boisterous chatter and easy camaraderie of the barracks. His presence within the unit was vital, though largely unappreciated, a quiet, almost invisible cog in the loud, grinding machinery of war. Show. Don't tell. Elias didn't just walk, he flowed, his boots finding purchase on loose shale where others stumbled, his body swaying with the natural rhythm of the land. His eyes, the color of moss after a rain, constantly scanned the horizon, not for obvious threats like enemy patrols or large formations, but for the imperceptible shifts that spoke of deeper truths, a displaced pebble indicating recent passage, a faint, almost invisible track in the dust suggesting direction and weight, the sudden, synchronized flight pattern of a startled flock of crows signaling a disturbance miles away. He didn't rely on official topographic maps alone, though he knew them by heart. He felt the land, sensed its contours beneath his feet, tasted the direction of the wind on his tongue, interpreting its nuanced whispers. While other scouts relied on drone footage and blurry satellite imagery for their reports, Elias would spend hours tracing ancient game trails, charting hidden springs that didn't appear on any official survey, and noting the unique growth patterns of flora on different slopes, understanding what they revealed about soil composition and water sources. He kept his own counsel, his thoughts a complex tapestry of topographical data, environmental inferences, and intuitive leaps that often seemed to defy conventional logic. A quiet current of profound understanding ran through him, a deep, almost spiritual connection to the natural world that set him apart from his more conventional military brethren. He was a man who listened to the earth, and the earth, in turn, spoke to him in a language few could comprehend. The unit's commander, General Malcolm Thorne, aged 50, was a man carved from granite, both physically and in his unyielding temperament. His formidable reputation had been forged in the crucible of countless swift, decisive victories achieved through the application of overwhelming firepower and an unshakable, almost fanatical belief in aggressive offense. He strode through the encampment with an air of absolute, unassailable authority, his starched uniform immaculately pressed, his polished boots gleaming even in the dim light of dawn, a stark contrast to the dust-grimed fatigues and worn equipment of his infantrymen. Thorne scoffed at caution, viewing it as a debilitating weakness, a hesitation that bred indecision and, ultimately, defeat. He believed implicitly in the absolute superiority of his own forces, their cutting-edge weaponry, their seemingly endless numbers, and his own unparalleled strategic genius. The enemy, in his eyes, was disorganized, poorly equipped, and easily routed by a sheer display of force, a thunderous, undeniable advance. His booming laugh, often heard reverberating across the camp, was a testament to his self-satisfaction, his unyielding confidence in his own strategic brilliance, a sound that underscored his disdain for anything less than absolute, unhesitating aggression. Their relationship was typical of a rigid military hierarchy, yet it was laced with an undercurrent of Thorne's profound disdain for Elias. The general viewed Elias's quiet demeanor as a sign of inherent weakness, his cautious, meticulous approach as cowardice, and his peculiar observations, his penchant for reading the land, as the fanciful musings of a timid, unsuited mind. Thorne often publicly, and sometimes quite cruelly, criticized Elias, using him as a negative example of what a soldier shouldn't be. Corporal Vance here prefers to count butterflies rather than bullets. Thorne would sneer to his assembled officers, his voice dripping with sarcasm, a dismissive wave of his hand accompanying the jab, intended to belittle Elias in front of his peers. A true soldier faces the enemy, not the flora and fauna. Elias would simply meet the general's gaze with unwavering, though silent, resolve. His inner world a fortress against the general's bluster and thinly veiled insults. He understood that Thorne's perception was rooted in a fundamentally different worldview, one that valued brute force over subtle insight, and outward aggression over quiet observation. He harbored no ill will, only a deep-seated frustration at being so thoroughly misunderstood. One frigid dawn, a thin layer of frost clinging to every surface, as Elias conducted a solitary patrol deep in a rarely traversed ravine, a place few other soldiers dared to venture. He stumbled upon a scene of quiet desperation. The air was still, save for the faint, distant rumble of artillery fire from miles away, a constant reminder of the ongoing conflict. A small, isolated group of civilians, a family fleeing the distant conflict, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion, their meager belongings clutched tightly, were trapped. A recent, unseasonable rock slide had blocked their only escape route, a narrow, winding trail through the mountains, leaving them stranded and vulnerable, exposed to the harsh elements and the increasing danger of being caught between warring factions. Their eyes, wide with despair, locked onto Elias, a silent plea for help. Most soldiers, upon encountering such a situation, would have immediately called for reinforcements, for engineers to clear the path, or for a large-scale rescue operation, or simply advise the civilians to wait for official relief to arrive. They would follow procedure, rely on established protocols. But Elias saw the immediate human need, the pressing urgency of their predicament. He knew the engineers would be hours away, perhaps days, tied up with more strategic operations. He surveyed the chaotic scene, his mind already mapping alternative routes through the treacherous terrain. The rock slide, a jagged scar across the mountainside, had left a narrow, unstable path high above the original road, a perilous traverse that looked utterly impossible to the untrained eye, a path that most would deem too risky to even consider. He spent the next several hours, not barking orders or displaying overt authority, but meticulously, patiently guiding each individual. He spoke in soft, reassuring tones, his voice a calming counterpoint to their trembling fear. He showed the father exactly where to place his feet on the shifting scree, how to balance the small child strapped to his back, where to grip the gnarled, icy roots of ancient trees that clung precariously to the cliff face. He used his own strong, lean body as a brace, his steady hand supporting the elderly grandmother as she navigated a particularly treacherous stretch, her every step a struggle. He didn't speak much, only offering quiet, precise instructions. His calm, focused presence, a profound balm to their frayed nerves and rising panic. He pointed out barely visible handholds etched by centuries of erosion, meticulously tested unstable rocks before allowing them to step, and found hidden crevices that offered brief respite from the biting wind and drifting snow. It was a perilous journey, filled with the constant, unseen threat of further rockfalls, of a slip that could send them plummeting into the ravine below. But Elias's intimate knowledge of the geology, his intuitive understanding of the slope's shifting dynamics, and his uncanny ability to anticipate the land's next move, allowed him to navigate these unseen dangers with a precision that bordered on the miraculous. By dusk, the last vestiges of daylight fading into the gray horizon, he had successfully led the entire family, exhausted but miraculously unharmed, to a safer, more stable path that would eventually take them to a designated refugee camp miles away. He provided them with a portion of his own emergency rations, high-energy bars and purified water, and a detailed map he had quickly sketched on a piece of paper, marking safe water sources and concealed shelters that would protect them from the elements and potential patrols. He watched them disappear into the twilight, their figures fading against the darkening landscape, the silent gratitude in their eyes a far more meaningful reward than any medal or official commendation. It was a small, unsung act of heroism, a quiet testament to his inherent humanity, his selflessness, and his unique practical skills, his save-the-cat moment. It showcased his meticulous mind applied not to abstract battle plans or tactical maneuvers, but to a tangible human crisis, proving his capabilities extended far beyond the traditional confines of military engagement, demonstrating a profound care for life that few in his world truly possessed. In the solitude of his bivouac, long after the last embers of the communal fire had died down and the rhythmic snores of his comrades filled the frigid night air, Elias would often retrieve his most prized possession. It was a battered, canvas-bound notebook, its cover worn smooth from years of handling, its pages filled not with personal musings or family photos, but with an arcane collection of meticulously drawn, hand-annotated maps, intricate geological diagrams, precise analyses of subterranean water flow patterns, and granular descriptions of various ecosystems unique to this rugged terrain. He charted seasonal bird migrations, the subtle discoloration of certain rock formations that indicated hidden mineral deposits or fault lines, and the almost imperceptible scent of specific fungi that grew only in undisturbed ancient forests, all details dismissed by conventional cartography. He would spend hours poring over it, his brow furrowed in deep concentration, a small, battery-powered lamp casting a soft glow over the intricate sketches, as if he were deciphering a hidden language, a secret code embedded within the very fabric of the landscape. He called it his silent observations, insights gleaned not from official intelligence reports or military briefings, but from patient, solitary immersion in the wilderness. He would sketch the intricate patterns of wind erosion on a particular ridge, noting precisely how it could alter sound transmission, carrying whispers across miles or muffling the roar of an approaching engine. He'd diagram the precise angle of a slope and its inherent susceptibility to rock slides after a heavy rain or a sudden thaw, predicting with uncanny accuracy where the earth might give way. He even had detailed notes on the behavior of local wildlife, the sudden, unexplained absence of game in a particular valley, the unusual agitation of birds before a storm, the panicked scurrying of small mammals, which he viewed as incredibly sensitive environmental indicators, subtle alarms signaling unseen dangers. His comrades, if they ever happened to glance over his shoulder while he was engrossed in his studies, dismissed it as his weird nature journal, a quirky hobby that had no place in the grim realities of war. General Thorne, in particular, scoffed at it, seeing it as irrefutable proof of Elias's lack of focus on real military matters, a childish distraction from the brutal business of conflict. But for Elias, it was far more than a hobby. It was a living document, a profound connection to the intricate, hidden patterns of the natural world, a source of almost prophetic understanding that allowed him to see what others could not, to perceive the whispers of impending events long before they manifested into undeniable roars. It was his seed of mystery, a quiet testament to a unique, extraordinary talent lying dormant, patiently awaiting its moment to reveal its true, life-saving power, unseen and unappreciated by those who judged military prowess solely by brute force, aggressive tactics, and the blunt instruments of conventional warfare. The frigid wind carried a new tension into the northern frontier encampment. Whispers of a major offensive, a decisive push, crackled through the ranks, quickly becoming the dominant topic of conversation. General Malcolm Thorne, his chest puffed with characteristic self-importance, had just received new orders directly from high command. His forces were tasked with seizing Dragon's Tooth Pass. This strategic mountain pass, a winding, treacherous artery through the heart of the enemy territory, was more than just a geographical feature. It was a critical trade route, a vital choke point that had long been under enemy control. Capturing it would be a monumental victory, a turning point in the war, and a shining feather in Thorne's already decorated cap. Thorne, in his briefings, declared the assault a high-stakes but unfailingly successful mission. His voice, booming and confident, resonated through the command tent, echoing his absolute conviction in his troops' superior training and overwhelming firepower. He spoke of historical precedents, of past victories, and of the inevitable collapse of the enemy's defenses under the sheer might of his advancing battalions. There was no room for doubt, no space for caution in Thorne's grand design. This was a direct assault, a head-on collision, and he envisioned nothing less than a glorious, swift triumph. Eleanor, still reeling from the quiet satisfaction of aiding the civilian family, found herself thrust back into the grim realities of war. As a corporal, his role was often overlooked, but his unique skills were occasionally, if reluctantly, utilized by his superiors. He was assigned to lead a small reconnaissance team, tasked with scouting the primary and secondary approach routes to Dragon's Tooth Pass. This was his element, the wildlands his canvas, and his senses, long dulled by the monotony of camp life, sharpened with an almost visceral intensity. He spent days in the desolate, mountainous terrain surrounding the pass, moving like a phantom, observing, listening, and documenting. He meticulously charted every rise and fall of the land, every shadow cast by the jagged peaks. His old, battered notebook became an extension of his mind, its pages filling with new observations. It was during these solitary patrols that a profound, unsettling feeling began to take root within him. He started to notice subtle, almost imperceptible disturbances in the local fauna, the unusual absence of birdsong in areas that should have been teeming with life, the panicked scurry of rabbits and deer away from seemingly undisturbed thickets, the unnatural silence that descended upon certain stretches of the valley, a silence far deeper than mere wilderness tranquility. He found telltale signs in the environment itself. Rarely used game trails now showed faint, almost expertly concealed boot prints, indicating irregular, heavy movements of troops, movements too subtle for untrained eyes to detect. He noted unusual wind patterns, currents swirling against the natural flow of the canyon, hinting at hidden structures or large, concealed masses diverting the air. He observed strange shifts in water flow, faint trickles where there should have been none, or conversely, a lack of expected spring melt, suggesting recent excavations or blockages upstream. Even the subtle, almost metallic scent of disturbed earth, mixed with something synthetic, wafted on the breeze in certain areas, hinting at freshly dug fortifications or hidden caches of equipment. His intuitive leap, that primal understanding of the land he had cultivated since childhood, suddenly ignited. This wasn't just random environmental data. It was a complex symphony of alarms, a desperate warning sung by the very earth itself. These weren't signs of a scattered, weak enemy, as Thorne believed. These were the highly disciplined, meticulously hidden indicators of a massive, meticulously planned ambush. The enemy wasn't weak. They were cunning, leveraging the treacherous terrain to their utmost advantage. The urge to warn his command, to scream his observations from the mountaintops, pulsed through his veins, a powerful, undeniable force that overshadowed his usual quiet deference. His internal struggle was immense. He knew the cost of speaking out, the ridicule he would face, but the lives of his comrades outweighed any personal discomfort. Upon his return to camp, Elias immediately sought an audience with General Thorne. He found the general in the command tent, surrounded by maps and junior officers, all basking in the glow of anticipated victory. Thorn, seeing Elias, offered a condescending nod. "Ah, Corporal Vance, back from your nature walk. I presume did you find any interesting rocks for your collection?" His voice dripped with sarcasm, a performance for his officers. Eleanor, ignoring the taunt, stood at attention. "General, with all due respect, my reconnaissance has revealed highly disturbing anomalies around Dragon's Tooth Pass. The enemy is not scattered. They are concentrated, concealed, and preparing a massive ambush. I've observed unusual animal movements, hidden trails, altered wind patterns, and subtle changes in the water flow that indicate extensive tunneling and concealed fortifications. This is not a direct assault target, it's a trap, a deadly one. We need to retreat and reconsider our approach, or at the very least, find an alternative route, perhaps flank them through the Whisperwind canyons, even if it adds days to our march." His voice was urgent, his gaze direct, filled with a desperate plea. Thorn listened, a slow, derisive smile spreading across his face. He exchanged amused glances with his officers, who dutifully chuckled. An ambush. Corporal Vance. A massive ambush, from an enemy we've driven to the brink of collapse. He threw his head back and let out a loud, booming laugh, a sound that reverberated through the tent, causing the maps on the table to tremble. "My dear Corporal, I appreciate your vivid imagination, but we are not here to entertain your cowardly suggestions or your nervous ramblings. Your anomalies are just the rustling of leaves, the natural behavior of animals, and perhaps the overactive paranoia of a soldier who clearly lacks the courage for a real fight." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that still carried the weight of command. "Let me be clear, Corporal, we don't retreat, not from a bunch of ragtag insurgents. We advance, with overwhelming force. Your suggestions are nothing but the whining of a weak-hearted man, a disgrace to your uniform. We do not falter, we do not fear. We crush our enemies. Your retreat idea is not just cowardly, it's insubordinate. You don't understand the true nature of conflict. Corporal, this is about decisive action, not about observing squirrels." His words were a calculated, brutal assault on Elias's character, designed to humiliate him and silence any further dissent. Thorn's internal monologue was filled with contempt. He saw Elias's detailed observations as fanciful excuses to avoid confrontation, a fundamental flaw in character that deserved to be rooted out. Eleanor felt the familiar sting of Thorn's dismissal, but this time it was laced with a chilling undercurrent of dread. His words, sharp and demeaning, cut deep, but the image of hundreds of his comrades walking blindly into a slaughterhouse was far more agonizing. His initial reaction was a familiar mixture of hurt and profound frustration. He wanted to scream, to force Thorn to see what he saw, but Thorn's ego was an impenetrable fortress. He could not be reasoned with. However, the general's casual dismissal, his open ridicule, and his unwavering commitment to a suicidal path ignited a different kind of fire within Elias. It wasn't just the insult to his intelligence. It was the casual disregard for human life, the arrogant blindness that would lead his comrades to their deaths. Thorn's contempt, instead of breaking him, hardened his resolve. A quiet, yet fierce determination settled deep in Elias's gut. He knew he couldn't convince Thorn, not with words. He had to act. He would not stand by and watch his unit march into an ambush. He simply saluted, his face impassive, masking the whirlwind of emotions within. "Understood, General." That night, a soft glow emanated from Elias's small, secluded corner of the encampment. He spent hours poring over his old, battered notebook, cross-referencing his recent observations with historical geological data of Dragon's Tooth Pass. He mapped out alternative routes, painstakingly detailing every hidden crevice, every precarious ledge, every natural concealment point that could offer a chance of survival. a way to circumvent the inevitable. He wasn't planning a direct defiance of orders, but he was preparing. He was gathering every scrap of knowledge, every intuitive insight, every piece of fringe data to find a way to mitigate the disaster he knew was coming. He traced escape routes, analyzed choke points the enemy would exploit, and mentally rehearsed every possible scenario. His intuitive leaps felt validated by the subtle, interconnected patterns he discerned. With a deep, shaky breath, a quiet act of desperate hope, Elias began to draw up highly detailed, unofficial escape plans and alternative approaches, focusing on the less conventional paths he knew the land offered. He couldn't force Thorn to retreat, but he could, perhaps, provide a lifeline, a desperate hope for those who would inevitably be caught in the storm. This was more than just a military maneuver. It was an act of personal defiance, a desperate plea for survival. He had placed a silent, monumental bet on his own intuition, on the power of his own discerning eye, even if it meant being labeled a coward. There was no turning back now. Thorn had completely dismissed Elias's suggestion to retreat and had given the explicit order to advance as planned. Elias knew that he could not simply return to his normal life, his normal duties, knowing what he knew. He had stepped onto a new path, one dictated not by Thorn's flawed ambitions, but by his own quiet, burning conviction and an overwhelming sense of responsibility for his comrades' lives. This was his point of no return. The subtle hum of dissatisfaction that had permeated his days had been replaced by a quiet, desperate resolve. The seed of his true potential, long dormant, had finally been watered, and it was beginning to sprout, under the most dire of circumstances. The relentless advance of General Malcolm Thorn's forces into the treacherous terrain leading to Dragon's Tooth Pass began with a deceptive calm. The crisp mountain air, once so alive with Elias Vance's subtle warnings, now seemed to hum with the low thrum of marching boots and the distant rumble of supply vehicles. Thorn, oblivious to the deeper truths of the landscape, was in his element. He strode at the head of his columns, his chest puffed out, a permanent, self-satisfied smirk on his face. He regularly boasted over the tactical radio, his voice echoing through the valley, proclaiming their steady progress and the supposed cowardice of an enemy that seemingly offered no resistance. Another mile gained. "Gentlemen, the enemy clearly fears the might of our advance," he would declare, his words laced with condescension for anyone who had ever suggested caution. He saw every unchallenged step as further proof of his infallible judgment and Elias's supposed timidity. Beneath the veneer of confident advance, however, a simmering anxiety permeated the lower ranks. Many of the company and platoon commanders, seasoned but less outspoken than Thorn, felt an unsettling quietness in the air, a lack of the usual enemy skirmishes that often preceded a major engagement. Among them was Captain Lena Petrova, a sharp, pragmatic officer in her early 30s, known for her meticulous planning and quiet leadership. She commanded a forward infantry company, and while she respected Thorn's past victories, she privately harbored a growing unease about his aggressive, unyielding strategy. She had heard whispers of Corporal Vance's unusual observations, though she, like many, viewed them with a healthy dose of skepticism, conditioned by years of conventional military doctrine. Still, there was an intuitive flicker within her that acknowledged something was amiss. She lacked the courage, or perhaps the perceived authority, to openly challenge Thorn, a man whose ego was as formidable as his rank. Her gaze often drifted to Elias, who moved with his small scout team on the flanks, a solitary figure seemingly at peace with the silent wilderness. The deceptive calm was shattered not by a grand enemy assault, but by a deceptively small, yet jarring incident. Elias's unit, pushing point on a narrow, rocky trail known as Serpent's Coil, inadvertently triggered a localized, secondary explosion. It wasn't a massive blast, but enough to send a shower of rock and debris across the path, effectively blocking the main advance for the leading platoons. A low murmur of surprise and frustration rippled through the ranks. General Thorn, alerted to the minor setback, arrived at the scene, his face a thundercloud. He immediately barked orders. "Engineers, clear this path immediately. We cannot be delayed by such a trivial obstruction." He saw it as a mere nuisance, a minor inconvenience, and a testament to the enemy's desperate, futile attempts to slow his inevitable victory. He was impatient, his mind already set on the next milestone. Eleanor, standing near the blocked path, his senses already absorbing the subtle nuances of the debris field, felt a prickle of unease that quickly escalated into a chilling certainty. He didn't see a random rock slide or a haphazard explosion. His deep, almost primal understanding of the land, honed by years of meticulous observation, immediately recognized the intricate pattern of the disruption. He saw the unusual fracturing of the rock, the specific arc of the scattered shrapnel, the faint, almost imperceptible scent of a secondary explosive residue, distinct from the initial blast. The way the dust settled, the unnatural silence that followed, even the minute disturbance in the local insect life, all whispered of something far more deliberate, far more sinister than a random event. His mind, racing through geological data and enemy tactics, quickly put the pieces together. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a booby trap, cleverly designed to halt the advance and funnel troops into a specific area. And if there was one, there were likely more. His eyes, scanning the terrain with laser-like focus, immediately picked up the telltale signs of a secondary explosive trap, meticulously camouflaged amidst the fallen rocks, just meters from where the engineers were preparing to clear the initial debris. A tiny, almost invisible glint of disturbed soil, a barely discernible tension in a thin tripwire hidden amongst the rubble. Details that would be utterly missed by anyone not possessing Elias's unique, almost intuitive, connection to the land. Without a moment's hesitation, acting on pure instinct and the undeniable urgency of the situation, Elias moved. He didn't shout a warning that might panic the men. He simply dropped to his knees, his movements swift and fluid, his hands already working. His fingers, nimble and precise, moved with an almost surgical delicacy, tracing the barely visible line of the tripwire, then carefully dismantling the crude, yet effective, firing mechanism. It was a silent, unheralded act of incredible courage and skill, performed under the very nose of a furious general and the oblivious engineers. He didn't call attention to himself. He simply acted, driven by an undeniable imperative to save lives. He unveiled his unique skill not through boasting, but through a necessary, life-saving intervention. Captain Lena Petrova, who had been observing the scene with a growing sense of disquiet, suddenly stiffened. She saw Elias's rapid, decisive movements, the way he seemed to intuit the hidden danger. She saw the intricate, almost invisible tripwire he carefully disarmed, and the crude but deadly explosive device he then revealed. Her eyes widened in genuine astonishment, then slowly, beautifully, shifted to profound admiration. She was a pragmatist, a woman who valued tangible results, and what she had just witnessed was undeniable proof of a truly exceptional ability. She hadn't seen him as anything more than a quiet, somewhat eccentric scout before. Now, she saw a man with an uncanny, almost supernatural understanding of his environment, a skill that transcended conventional military training. She realized, with a jolt, that the whispers about his peculiar observations were not idle gossip, but fragmented truths about an extraordinary talent. The seeds of trust and respect began to sprout within her. General Thorne, witnessing the incident from a few paces away, was initially frozen in disbelief. His face, usually a mask of supreme confidence, contorted into a mottled mixture of shame and simmering fury. He had just publicly dismissed Elias, only to have the corporal, moments later, silently and expertly avert a potentially deadly disaster right under his nose. The engineers, who had been about to step directly onto the secondary trap, looked at Elias with a mixture of confusion and dawning gratitude. Thorne's carefully constructed image of invincibility, his absolute control over the situation, had been subtly, yet decisively, undermined by the very soldier he so frequently ridiculed. He couldn't believe Elias possessed such a specific, life-saving capability. And the immediate thought that flashed through his mind was not gratitude, but a desperate need to discredit it. He needed to explain it away, to reduce it to something less than genuine talent. Vance Thorne bellowed, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage. "What in the blazes do you think you're doing? Fumbling around like a common sapper. You nearly tripped that thing yourself, didn't you? Just pure luck. You stumbled upon it. Or perhaps," he added, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper, his eyes narrowing with suspicion, "you knew it was there, didn't you? Perhaps you've been poking around in places you shouldn't be." His insinuation was clear, a vile accusation hinting at sabotage or even collaboration with the enemy. Thorne, now acutely aware of Elias's peculiar insights and uncanny abilities, became overtly hostile towards him. He couldn't tolerate the idea that a lowly corporal, especially one he had so consistently mocked, possessed a skill that rivaled, and even surpassed, his own strategic acumen. He began to publicly demean Elias more frequently and more viciously, calling him naive and attention-seeking, claiming that he had merely stumbled into a lucky guess, or picked up scraps of information from a less disciplined source. He fabricated elaborate theories to explain away Elias's successes, desperately trying to reduce them to coincidence or trickery. The general even went so far as to secretly order his junior officers to monitor Elias's movements and communications, instructing them to search for any evidence that could be used to discredit him, to prove he was unreliable, or even, in Thorne's increasingly paranoid mind, potentially in league with the enemy. He saw Elias's foresight not as a valuable asset, but as a direct challenge to his authority and his long-held belief in his own infallible judgment. Thorne desperately wanted to prove that he was the sole, indispensable strategic mind within the army, the only one capable of truly understanding the complexities of warfare. His internal monologue was a torrent of resentment and fear that Elias's quiet brilliance would expose his own limitations. This initial confrontation had not only revealed Elias's true, extraordinary talent, but had also cemented his husband's trajectory as a jealous, increasingly vengeful Type A antagonist, driven by insecurity and an overwhelming need to maintain his illusion of control and superiority. The stakes, for Elias, had just become far higher than simple combat. The relentless, almost hypnotic rhythm of the army's advance into Dragon's Tooth Pass continued, each synchronized bootfall echoing a hollow victory in Corporal Elias Vance's ears. The deceptive quiet that General Malcolm Thorne reveled in, interpreting it as enemy weakness and a testament to his own strategic brilliance, only amplified the corporal's growing dread. Thorne, his chest puffed out with unwavering, almost pathological self-importance, had now positioned his forces deep within the treacherous defile. It was a winding, narrow canyon, a natural funnel flanked on both sides by sheer, impassable cliffs that clawed at the perpetually overcast sky. The air, once sharp and clean, now felt heavy, almost suffocating, thick with the unspoken tension that only Elias seemed to perceive. Thorne, utterly convinced of the enemy's disarray, continued his triumphal march. His constant radio chatter was a litany of self-congratulation, his booming voice echoing back from the unforgiving rock faces. Another mile gained. "Gentlemen, the enemy clearly fears the might of our advance. We are unstoppable," he'd bellow. His words laced with condescension for anyone who had ever dared to suggest caution or hinted at an alternative strategy. He saw every unchallenged step as further, irrefutable proof of his infallible judgment and Elias's supposed timidity. His internal world was one of self-congratulation, a gilded cage of ego that prevented any dissenting thought from penetrating. He was blind to the subtle, deadly shift in the atmosphere, deaf to the silent, desperate warnings Elias had tried so vehemently to convey. Unbeknownst to Thorne, and indeed, to most of his confident, oblivious command. The enemy forces were far from broken or in disarray. Under the shrewd, ruthless command of General Kale, a cunning and merciless strategist known throughout the region for his brutal efficiency and his almost artistic mastery of ambush tactics, a massive, unprecedented trap had been meticulously laid. Kyle, a man whose patience was as legendary as his cruelty, had spent not weeks, but months, studying every contour of Dragon's Tooth Pass. He exploited every natural crevice, every hidden cave mouth, every blind turn in the winding canyon to establish a series of interlocking kill zones. His soldiers, disciplined, fanatical, and loyal to the point of self-sacrifice, were dug into concealed positions. Their heavy weaponry machine guns, mortars, and anti-personnel mines perfectly sited to unleash a devastating torrent of fire upon the unsuspecting invaders. Kale harbored a deep, personal vendetta against Thorne's forces, seeing them as arrogant, blundering invaders who deserved a brutal, unforgettable lesson in humility and the true cost of underestimating a determined foe. He watched the encroaching columns through high-powered binoculars, a predatory gleam in his eyes, like a spider patiently waiting for its prey to become hopelessly entangled in its web. He was the Type A antagonist, a cunning, merciless puppet master orchestrating a symphony of destruction, his mind a labyrinth of tactical brilliance and cold-blooded calculation. His motivations were clear, not just victory, but the utter annihilation and humiliation of Thorne's forces. Elias, moving ahead of the main column with his small scout team, his senses hyper-alert, felt the signs of the impending ambush escalate with chilling, undeniable clarity. He was no longer observing, he was experiencing the land's desperate warnings. The air grew heavy, almost oppressive, thick with an unnatural stillness that transcended mere quiet. The unnatural silence of the forest was now absolute. Not a single bird chirped, not a rustle of leaves, not the distant scamper of small game, or the buzzing of insects that normally filled the mountain air. It was the silence of a held breath, a primal stillness that screamed imminent danger, a stark contrast to the usual vibrant symphony of the wilderness. He saw flocks of birds scattering erratically high above the ridges, their panicked, directionless flight a visible warning sign ignored by those below, whose eyes were fixated only on the ground directly in front of them. He found subtly disguised footprints, meticulously brushed over with branches and leaves, leading into seemingly innocuous rock formations and dense thickets, signs that only his trained eye, attuned to the minutiae of the Earth's disturbed surface, could decipher. These weren't the casual tracks of patrolling scouts. They were the heavy, purposeful marks of units moving into defensive positions. He noted the fresh, faint scent of spent gunpowder and cordite wafting from a hidden cave entrance, signaling recent weapon testing or the setting up of firing posts. There was also the almost imperceptible scent of freshly turned earth, cleverly camouflaged, indicating newly dug trenches or defensive emplacements. His internal alarm bells, usually a soft murmur, now screamed with frantic, desperate urgency. The enemy wasn't retreating. They were waiting, coiled and ready to strike. The entire pass was a coiled viper, ready to unleash its venom. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on Elias with suffocating intensity, a physical burden that seemed to bend his shoulders. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that hundreds of lives, the lives of his comrades, the men he had eaten beside, joked with, and served alongside, were walking blindly into a meat grinder. He had to warn them, to force Thorne to see the undeniable truth. But Thorne was beyond reason, his ego an impenetrable shield against any dissenting voice. Every previous attempt Elias had made to communicate the escalating danger, to offer his observations, was met with increased hostility and irrational dismissal. "Corporal, are you still seeing ghosts?" Thorne had sneered just hours earlier, his voice laced with venom and sarcasm that cut deeper than any physical blow. "Your nervous disposition is unbecoming of a soldier. Focus on your duties, not on your fantastical imaginings or your peculiar hobbies." Elias felt utterly alone, burdened by the crushing responsibility of protecting his unit from a threat their general stubbornly, arrogantly refused to acknowledge. He was a lone, unheard voice crying out against a tide of self-delusion, a Cassandra prophesying doom to a deaf audience. This isolation was a profound agony, knowing he possessed the key to their survival, but lacked the authority to use it. The faces of the soldiers he had eaten with, shared stories with, flashed before his eyes. Good men, brave men, about to be sacrificed on the altar of Thorne's pride. The chilling reality of their predicament was compounded by an undeniable, suffocating time pressure. Elias knew the pass intimately. Every crevice, every strategic point, every hidden path. He had charted every meter, every treacherous turn in his notebook. He calculated with grim precision that Thorne's leading platoons would cross the critical point of no return within the next 2 hours. This point, marked by a distinctive pair of gnarled, ancient twin oaks at the narrowest, most exposed section of the defile, was a geographical bottleneck. Once they advanced past those trees, withdrawing would become an absolute impossibility. The terrain would offer no viable cover, no conceivable escape routes. They would be utterly exposed, trapped like rats in a funnel, with the enemy holding all the strategic high ground, poised to unleash a withering crossfire. The sheer cliff faces would amplify the deafening roar of 1,000 guns, echoing with the screams of the dying, trapping the sounds of the massacre within the canyon walls. Every ticking minute, every slow, deliberate step of Thorne's confident advance brought them closer to an inescapable annihilation, a bloodbath from which few would emerge. Elias could almost feel the cold grip of inevitability tightening around him. Elias knew he had one last, desperate chance to avert the catastrophe. With a pounding heart, he immediately requested an urgent, unscheduled briefing with Thorne's entire general staff. The meeting was to take place in the general's temporary command tent, a large, imposing canvas structure pitched precariously at the very entrance to the deadliest section of Dragon's Tooth Pass. It was a place where Thorne's authority was absolute, where his every word was law, and where dissent was not just discouraged, but quickly, brutally suppressed. This makeshift command center, usually a hub of confident strategic planning and boastful pronouncements, now served as the symbolic arena for Elias's ultimate test. Here, surrounded by the very officers who had witnessed Thorne's public mockery and shared his general's condescending amusement, Elias would have to present his undeniable, meticulously gathered evidence. He would be forced to confront the general's entrenched arrogance head-on, to cut through layers of pride and prejudice, and to convince them of a truth they stubbornly refused to see. He would stand alone, a mere corporal, facing a room full of seasoned generals and colonels, men whose careers depended on unquestioning loyalty to Thorne, armed only with his data, his intuitive insights, and the undeniable wisdom of the land, the collective fate of an entire battalion. Perhaps even the tide of the broader campaign rested squarely on his ability to shatter the general's stubborn pride and expose the looming catastrophe for what it truly was: a meticulously planned slaughter. He meticulously organized his notes, his hands steady despite the tremor in his gut, a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He knew Thorne would not simply listen. He would try to tear him down, to ridicule him again, to invalidate his observations and paint him as a coward or a lunatic. But the lives of his comrades, the innocent men who unknowingly followed their arrogant general towards their doom, were a powerful, undeniable motivator, a burning flame that pushed away his personal fear. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, picturing the intricate network of enemy positions, the hidden firing lines, the carefully placed explosives. He could see it all as clearly as if he were standing there. He could almost hear the chaotic screams of the ambush, the deafening roar of 1,000 guns, the desperate cries for help. He took a deep, fortifying breath, steeling himself for the inevitable confrontation, knowing with chilling certainty that this was his last, desperate chance to prevent a massacre of unimaginable proportions. The overwhelming weight of his isolated foresight, The unbearable burden of knowing what no one else would believe was almost unbearable. But Elias would not waver. He would stand his ground, not for glory, but for survival. The air inside the general's temporary command tent was thick with the scent of stale coffee, cold fear, and the unspoken tension that crackled between the assembled officers. The large canvas structure, barely holding back the biting wind of Dragon's Tooth Pass, felt less like a strategic hub and more like a pressure cooker on the verge of exploding. Corporal Elias Vance walked in, his spine ramrod straight, his face a mask of calm determination that belied the frantic pounding in his chest. He carried no weapons, only a well-worn tablet and his battered, canvas-bound notebook, symbols of his unconventional wisdom. General Malcolm Thorne sat at the head of the polished tactical table, his gaze like chips of ice, his posture rigid with barely suppressed fury at having his advance interrupted by a lowly corporal. His eyes, fixed on Elias, promised retribution. Captain Lena Petrova sat among the other officers, her expression a mix of professional skepticism and a glimmer of anxious hope. She had witnessed Elias's quiet competence before, and a sliver of her believed him, despite Thorne's constant dismissals. Unseen by all, a hidden comms link carried every word of this crucial meeting back to General Thorne's central command post, where he listened with a cynical smirk, convinced Elias was about to make a spectacular fool of himself, once and for all. He saw this presentation as an almost pathetic attempt for Elias to cling to a silly notion, while he, the true businessman, fought real battles. Elias set his tablet down with deliberate precision, its screen glowing softly in the dim light of the tent. He began. His voice, initially a soft ripple in the hushed room, gaining strength and clarity with each word, imbued with a quiet conviction that slowly began to command attention. He didn't start with tactical diagrams or military jargon. He began with a vision, a narrative of the land itself. He spoke of the intricate web of life that defined Dragon's Tooth Pass, of the subtle shifts in wind patterns, the faint echoes that reverberated strangely off the canyon walls, the abnormal silence of wildlife, and the almost imperceptible scent of disturbed earth. He painted a stark, yet undeniably vivid, picture of an ecosystem screaming a warning that only a few could hear. "Viridian Pass," he declared, his voice now resonant, filling the tent with an unexpected authority, "is not merely a geographical feature. It is a living entity, and it is screaming. It is not just a path, it is a meticulously crafted trap." He then delved into the specifics, his presentation a masterclass in analytical precision, delivered with the calm, focused intensity of a scholar. He didn't just trot out broad theories, he meticulously detailed the enemy's likely positions, the ingenious concealment methods they had employed, and the precise angles of fire from their hidden emplacements. He displayed a series of high-resolution topographical maps on his tablet, superimposed with his own meticulously drawn annotations. These weren't standard military maps. They were Elias's silent observations, translated into a language of undeniable truth. He showed intricate contour lines, marked with tiny, barely visible red X's, indicating enemy strongpoints he had discerned from the smallest environmental cues: a disturbed rock, a subtly bent twig, a faint smudge of oil on a hidden leaf. He revealed the locations of hidden mortar pits, identified by the precise echo patterns he'd heard bouncing off certain cliff faces. He even projected a chilling diagram of the enemy's interlocking kill zones, based on the unique acoustics of the canyon and the predictable behavior of advancing troops. He seamlessly wove in the fringe data from his old, battered notebook, which he had meticulously cross-referenced and translated into compelling, accessible visuals on his tablet. He displayed infrared images, subtly altered to highlight minute temperature variations indicating concealed tunnels. He cited obscure but crucial shifts in migratory bird patterns he had observed, predicting the presence of large, stationary forces where official intelligence had reported none. He even referenced a geological fault line, marked in his notebook years ago, that ran directly beneath a supposedly secure enemy supply depot, suggesting its vulnerability to a well-placed, deep charge, a detail few, if any, military strategists would bother to uncover. His words flowed with precision, backed by data gleaned from years of meticulous, silent observation, intertwined with intuitive leaps that baffled his audience. He presented not just a threat, but a complete tactical picture, demonstrating how the enemy had exploited every nuance of the land to their advantage, turning the very environment against Thorne's forces. He spoke with an authority born not of rank or arrogance, but of deep, intuitive understanding, his quiet conviction a stark contrast to Thorne's bluster. The officers, initially skeptical, leaned forward, their expressions slowly shifting from professional indifference to grudging fascination, a dawning realization blooming in their eyes. A veteran officer, Colonel Albright, known for his sharp mind and notoriously difficult, almost predatory, questions, suddenly cut her off. His voice, gruff and dismissive, echoed in the room, filled with the cynical air of a man who had seen countless genius plans fail. "Corporal Vance," he interjected, a sneer twisting his lips, "your ecological observations are certainly imaginative. But let's cut through the poetry. You claim this ambush is unprecedented. Yet, historical records indicate a similar, though smaller, ambush in this very pass during the 77 campaign. It was famously unsuccessful due to the enemy's logistical failures. Specifically, their lack of a viable egress route for their forward elements after initiating contact. How do you propose to account for that, when even your own preliminary analysis, assuming it's correct, doesn't address such a critical tactical flaw from a historical precedent?" His question was highly technical, designed to expose Elias as an amateur, to catch him off guard with a historical detail only deep military historians or career strategists would know. It was a loaded question, aimed squarely at humiliating him and undermining his credibility. Knowing Thorne was listening intently, David, on his end of the private comms link, a satisfied smirk spreading across his face, chuckled quietly. This was it. Elias was out of his depth. He couldn't possibly know the obscure details of a decades-old failed ambush. Elias paused. A ripple of nervous energy ran through the tent. His eyes, for a fleeting moment, darted to the right, a slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his hands. The room fell silent, the tension almost unbearable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Colonel Albright leaned back, a smug expression on his face, confident he had exposed Elias's bluff. Captain Lena Petrova, her face etched with worry, bit her lip, a flicker of disappointment in her eyes, as if her earlier fragile hope might have been misplaced. General Thorne, wherever he was listening, surely wore a triumphant grin, ready to issue a scathing reprimand. This was the bated breath moment, the precipice of failure where all seemed lost, where Elias's unconventional wisdom seemed poised to collapse under the weight of traditional military doctrine. But then, an almost imperceptible shift occurred in Elias's posture. A slow, knowing smile, subtle but profound, touched his lips. His eyes, instead of showing panic, gleamed with a newfound clarity, a quiet triumph. He hadn't just prepared for this, he had anticipated it. His fringe data and intuitive leaps, coupled with his obsessive study of every historical detail of the region, had led him down this very rabbit hole months ago. He had spent countless nights poring over dusty historical archives, not just military records, but local historical accounts, geological surveys from the 70s, and even anecdotal reports from the few survivors of that very campaign, searching for hidden patterns. "Colonel Albright," Elias began, his voice regaining its earlier strength, now resonating with utter, unshakable confidence, cutting through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "I appreciate your astute observation and your reference to the 77 campaign. You are entirely correct about the enemy's tactical flaw regarding egress. However, your information, while accurate, is incomplete." He pressed a button on his tablet, and a new, intricate three-dimensional topographical map of the pass appeared, highlighting a network of almost invisible tunnels and concealed pathways. My observations indicate that General Kale has spent the better part of a year developing a sophisticated, subterranean tunnel network, connecting their primary ambush positions with a series of previously unknown, deep cave systems that provide multiple, concealed egress routes and even a rapid redeployment capability. This network was specifically designed to mitigate the very logistical failures of the 77 campaign. He spoke effortlessly, detailing precise engineering specifications, geological formations that facilitated tunneling, and even referenced specific types of rock strata that would allow for silent excavation, a detail few in the room understood. But his command of the subject was undeniable. Furthermore, he continued, pressing another button to display a new, intricate chart showing recent seismic activity, our latest seismic readings, which I correlated with the distinct sound patterns of their excavation methods, documented in this proprietary report here. He pointed to the screen, show an average tunneling rate of 1.7 meters per day, indicating a completion timeline that aligns perfectly with their current defensive posture. This ensures long-term viability for their operation and, crucially, allows for swift retreat or flanking maneuvers once our forces are committed to the bottleneck. They are not just preparing an ambush. Colonel, they have built an underground city, a spiderweb of concealed movement and retreat. My unique analytical method, relying on multidisciplinary data points from geology, ecology, and even historical climatology, combined with intuitive pattern recognition, the very silly hobby Thorne mocked, allowed me to track these subtle environmental and behavioral shifts years before they became mainstream concerns. This foresight has driven my specific, now critical understanding of their complete tactical setup. He wasn't just answering the question, he was exceeding it, revealing a depth of knowledge and a strategic foresight that stunned even the most jaded, battle-hardened officers in the room. His composure was unwavering, his analysis irrefutable. The reaction in the room was immediate and profound. Colonel Albright, his face initially contorted in a sneer, visibly recoiled, his jaw dropping in stunned silence. He had intended to embarrass Elias, but instead, he had been utterly outmaneuvered, exposed as the less informed party. His face flushed with a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. General Thorne, on his end of the private connection, heard Sir Arthur's declaration. His face, glued to the silent video feed of Elias accepting congratulations, turned ashen. He saw the gleam in Sir Arthur's eyes, the excitement of the other investors, the sudden, undeniable rise of Viridian Biosciences from obscure startup to a global powerhouse. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, what that meant for him. His company, Vance Tech, was crumbling, its apps failing, its investors fleeing. His pride and arrogance had led him to scoff at this very opportunity, to laugh at his wife's brilliance. Now, her silly investment was soaring, while his own empire lay in ruins. The bitter taste of shame mixed with a searing envy filled his mouth. He slammed his fist on his desk, sending papers flying. His defeat was not just financial, it was a profound public humiliation, witnessed through the very technology he had once mastered. Captain Lena Petrova, who had watched the entire exchange with bated breath, now slowly, deliberately rose from her seat. Her initial skepticism had completely vanished, replaced by an expression of profound admiration and dawning awe. Her eyes, which had initially been filled with worry, now shone with respect and an almost reverent understanding. She saw not just potential, but a visionary, a deep strategic insight that transcended mere military protocols. She realized, with a jolt, that she had been blind, limited by her own preconceived notions of what a soldier should be. She had been a misunderstood figure type B, her conventional thinking preventing her from seeing true value. "General," she stated, her voice clear and firm, addressing Thorne's unseen presence. "Corporal Vance's assessment is not merely plausible. It is, in my professional opinion, irrefutable. We must heed his warning. Our current course is suicidal. Her public acknowledgement was a powerful act of defiance against Thorne's authority, a testament to the undeniable truth Elias had just laid bare. A polite, yet deeply impressed, murmur rippled through the group of senior officers. Whispers of astonishment filled the tent. Colonel Albright, still reeling, simply nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture of profound acknowledgement. "Corporal Vance," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, respect coloring every syllable. "I stand corrected. Your insights are truly exceptional. You've seen what we, with all our conventional intelligence, have missed." Other officers, one by one, began to voice their agreement, their initial skepticism completely shattered by the sheer depth of Elias's analysis. General Thorne, on the other end of the private comms link, heard every word. His face, likely contorted in a mask of impotent rage, would have been a sight to behold. He heard the shift in tone, the dawning respect in his officers' voices, the undeniable logic of Elias's presentation. He slammed his fist on his desk in his distant command post, sending papers flying. The bitter taste of shame mixed with a searing envy filled his mouth. His carefully constructed facade of invincibility, his absolute control over the situation, had been utterly shattered by the very corporal he had so casually dismissed. His defeat was not just tactical, it was a profound, public humiliation, witnessed by his entire staff. He couldn't believe Elias had such profound knowledge, or that he had kept it hidden, now exposing Thorne's folly to his peers. The air around him suddenly felt suffocating, filled with the unspoken judgment of his esteemed guests. Eleanor, standing tall amidst the sudden clamor of impressed officers, felt a profound sense of vindication. It wasn't about the glory or the personal triumph, though those were undeniably present. It was about the validation of his intuition, the triumph of his quiet brilliance over loud arrogance, of long-term vision over fleeting, conventional thinking. He had been dismissed, mocked, and underestimated. But in the crucible of this moment, he had proven his worth, not with bluster, but with profound insight, unwavering conviction, and an almost superhuman connection to the very earth they fought upon. The future, for this battalion, now rested on his ability to guide them through the perilous trap that Thorne had so confidently led them into. The quiet brilliance, so long dismissed as cowardly suggestions, had finally found its voice, and in doing so, had saved countless lives. The echoes of Elias Vance's irrefutable presentation lingered in the command tent, a stark counterpoint to the distant, ominous rumble that now permeated Dragon's Tooth Pass. Despite the overwhelming evidence and the earnest pleas of his staff, General Malcolm Thorne, crippled by his own colossal ego and blinded by a lifetime of unwavering, misguided confidence, could not bring himself to order a full retreat or a complete change of course. He was a man utterly incapable of admitting error, even in the face of impending catastrophe. His mind, once so decisive, now fractured under the weight of this unbearable truth. He issued confused, contradictory orders, attempting a partial, half-hearted flanking maneuver that was too little, too late, and still exposed a significant portion of his forces to the pre-planned killing zones. He was a general utterly undone by his own hubris, unable to pivot, unable to adapt. The ambush, when it finally broke, was a maelstrom of unimaginable savagery, unfolding precisely as Elias had predicted, with chilling accuracy. The narrow defile transformed into a slaughterhouse. Heavy machine gun fire ripped through the leading platoons. Mortars rained down from hidden positions, and coordinated charges from concealed tunnels overwhelmed unprepared flanks. Thorne's forces, caught in a death trap, suffered catastrophic losses. Hundreds of soldiers, brave but doomed by their general's arrogance, perished in the canyon. The screams of the wounded mingled with the deafening roar of explosions and relentless gunfire, a horrifying symphony of destruction. Thorne, from a relatively safe vantage point, watched in horrified disbelief as his grand, unfailingly successful mission dissolved into a bloody, chaotic rout. The image of Elias's map, the precise red X's marking every hidden enemy position, seared itself into his mind, an agonizing testament to his monumental failure. In the brutal aftermath, the full extent of the disaster was laid bare. Thorn had lost a significant portion of his elite troops, and the reputation he had so meticulously cultivated over decades evaporated in a single, catastrophic battle. The military tribunal that followed was swift and unforgiving. Testimonies from surviving officers, particularly the powerful and damning account from Captain Lena Petrova, painted a clear picture of Thorn's arrogant disregard for expert intelligence and his catastrophic misjudgment. The evidence of Elias Vance's precise, ignored warnings was irrefutable, meticulously documented and corroborated by the grim reality of the battle. General Malcolm Thorn, once a celebrated hero, was stripped of his rank, publicly dishonored, and summarily dismissed from military service. He faced further legal proceedings, implicated in the severe loss of life due not to enemy action alone, but to his gross negligence and blatant insubordination in disregarding critical intelligence. He became a cautionary tale, a symbol of how pride and ego can lead to utter ruin. He had always been a Type A antagonist, driven by ambition and a complete contempt for anyone who challenged his authority. Now, he faced a complete and utter professional and personal annihilation, a fate commensurate with his deceitful portrayal of his own abilities and his callous disregard for the lives under his command. He was not just defeated, he was professionally, socially, and emotionally annihilated, left with nothing but the bitter ashes of his own arrogance. In stark contrast, Captain Lena Petrova, who had found her voice in the face of Thorn's madness, emerged with honor and a newfound respect. During the official inquiry, she stood tall, unwavering, and articulate. She delivered a powerful, moving testimony, detailing Elias's accurate warnings and Thorn's dismissal of them. She didn't seek to protect her own career by shifting blame. Instead, she chose integrity. Corporal Vance presented irrefutable evidence, she declared to the tribunal, her voice echoing with conviction. He saw what we, bound by conventional thinking and, dare I say, a misguided loyalty, failed to see. I, too, was initially skeptical, but his methods, his insights, they are beyond anything I have encountered. She publicly acknowledged her own initial doubts about Elias's unconventional approach, demonstrating a humility that resonated deeply with the investigating officers. I admit, I underestimated him, she stated, her gaze firm, and for that, I take responsibility. But he was right, and his genius should be recognized, not suppressed. Her public confession of her initial misunderstanding, coupled with her courageous defense of Elias, transformed her from a Type B misunderstood figure into a steadfast advocate for Elias and his innovative, unconventional methods of intelligence gathering and analysis. She became a pivotal figure in the subsequent reforms within military intelligence, pushing for a more open-minded approach to scouting and reconnaissance. For Elias Vance, the aftermath was a journey from quiet obscurity to undeniable recognition. His name, once synonymous with odd or eccentric, was now whispered with awe and reverence throughout the military. He was not just vindicated, he was celebrated as the lone voice of reason, the visionary who had seen the unseen. He was rapidly promoted, bypassing several ranks, and was offered command of a newly established Special Reconnaissance Unit. This was not a typical unit. It was specifically tailored to his unique talents. Its mandate was to specialize in unconventional reconnaissance and terrain analysis, applying Elias's meticulous methods, his silent observations, to gather intelligence and predict threats that traditional methods consistently missed. This new opportunity was far more than a material reward. It was the ultimate validation of his abilities, a chance to apply his genius on a larger scale, to train others in his profound understanding of the land. He was no longer just an exceptional corporal. He was a leader, a teacher, a pioneer, someone who had found a higher purpose in using his extraordinary talent to save lives and redefine military intelligence. He had found his true calling, a path that aligned perfectly with his innate abilities and deepest convictions. Elias politely but firmly declined all attempts by Thorne, through intermediaries, to reconcile or to claim any credit for Elias's post-debacle success, setting a clear boundary and illustrating his unwillingness to be manipulated further. One quiet, crisp evening, Elias sat in his newly assigned, sparsely furnished but functional office within the command headquarters, the silence a welcome contrast to the chaos of the past weeks. The office overlooked a vast training ground, where new recruits drilled under the twilight sky. Captain Lena Petrova, now elevated to a senior intelligence officer and Elias's trusted second-in-command for the new unit, sat opposite him, nursing a steaming mug of tea. They often shared these quiet, reflective moments, a ritual that cemented their bond of mutual respect and shared purpose. "It's incredible, isn't it?" Elias Lena mused, her gaze drifting to the maps on the wall, meticulously marked with Elias's complex annotations. All those years, all those dismissals, and now, they're scrambling to understand what you've always known. They're calling your methods the Vance Protocol in intelligence briefings now. A small smile touched her lips. Elias, tracing a line on a topographical map with his finger, shrugged slightly. It was never about being right. Lena, not really. It was about seeing something others couldn't. About trusting the whispers of the land when the loudest voices told me I was foolish. It was about trying to protect the men who couldn't see the trap. He paused, his gaze softening as he looked at her. And it was about someone finally being willing to listen, to challenge their own assumptions, and to speak up when it mattered. Speak up when... Lena nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I admit, I was one of those who doubted. I was conditioned to think conventionally. But you, Elias, you proved that value isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's quiet, it's overlooked, and it's found in the most unexpected places, like the rustle of a leaf or the flight of a bird." She took a sip of her tea. "My greatest lesson wasn't about military strategy, Elias. It was about learning to trust true insight, even when it comes from an unconventional source. It was about recognizing genius, not just rank, and it was about finding my own voice, no longer afraid to challenge the established order when I knew it was wrong." Elias offered her a rare, genuine smile. "Indeed, we've both built a new calm, haven't we? A peace born not of circumstance, but of conviction. A peace found in the quiet certainty of knowing your purpose and being free to pursue it." Their conversation lingered, a testament to Elias's journey of self-discovery and the quiet power of finding one's true north, free from the shadows of past dismissals and the crushing weight of arrogant authority. The path ahead was still fraught with challenges, but Elias Vance walked it with an undeniable inner peace, a peace forged in the crucible of his ultimate test. 3 years later, the name Elias Vance was no longer a quiet whisper among a few insightful officers or a controversial topic in military tribunals. It was a resounding declaration throughout the global military and intelligence community. His reputation, once built on the quiet, often mocked eccentricity of a corporal, had transformed into that of Major Elias Vance, a globally respected military strategist, an unparalleled authority on unconventional intelligence, and a beacon of intellectual prowess and compassionate leadership. The old life of quiet domesticity, where his talents were stifled and his insights dismissed by a superior blinded by his own ego, had been utterly and profoundly transformed. It was now a life of immense impact and deep personal fulfillment. The nagging, pervasive feeling of unfulfilled potential, of a brilliant mind confined by the narrow strictures of conventional thinking, had completely vanished, replaced by the quiet, powerful hum of a mind working precisely where it was meant to be. Its insights now sought and valued on an international stage, influencing policies and saving lives across continents. His former existence, intrinsically tied to the rigid hierarchy and traditional, often ossified. Thinking of Thorne's command was now a distant, almost hazy memory. Major Vance no longer lived in the confines of military housing or the temporary bivouacs of the frontier. He now resided in a beautiful, sustainably designed home, nestled amongst a sprawling, meticulously restored wilderness area. A vast tract of land that had once been scarred by neglect, but now hummed with vibrant life. This was not a barren, rocky pass, but a thriving ecosystem that pulsed with natural energy, a living, breathing testament to the very principles of ecological and topographical understanding he had championed. It was a space that perfectly reflected his inner peace and profound connection to the natural world, minimalist in design, yet profoundly warm and inviting, filled not with lavish furnishings but with towering shelves laden with ancient maps, cutting-edge scientific journals, and an array of intricate self-solving puzzles that adorned every available surface, constant, tangible reminders of the complex patterns and hidden truths he delighted in deciphering. Sunlight streamed through large windows, bringing the outside in, blurring the lines between his home and the thriving wilderness beyond, a testament to his integrated worldview. The once strained, almost antagonistic relationship with Colonel Albright, who had initially challenged him so sharply and publicly, had evolved into one of deep mutual respect, genuine admiration, and an indispensable professional partnership. Albright, a man of profound integrity who had been genuinely humbled by Elias's undeniable foresight and the catastrophic consequences of ignoring it, had transformed into a fervent, outspoken advocate for the new methods. He now served as a senior advisor to Elias's burgeoning unit, often bringing young, promising recruits and even seasoned officers from other commands to the restored wilderness areas where Elias would lead practical, immersive field exercises. Here, under Elias's quiet tutelage, they learned to listen to the land, to decipher its subtle cues, and to understand the profound interconnectedness of environment and strategy. Albright, never one for effusive praise, would often tell anyone who listened, his voice now laced with genuine awe and a touch of pride. Major Vance, he's not just a soldier, he's a prophet of the terrain. He's teaching us to truly see the battlefield, not just fight on it with brute force. He's redefined what intelligence means. He had even established a new, highly coveted advanced reconnaissance course at the prestigious National Military Academy, which prominently featured Elias's Vance Protocol for Strategic Environmental Intelligence as its core curriculum, ensuring his legacy was built into the very fabric of military training. Captain Lena Petrova, now Major Lena Petrova herself, had ascended rapidly through the ranks, becoming Elias's indispensable second-in-command and a formidable tactical analyst in her own right. Their professional bond, forged in the crucible of Dragon's Tooth Pass and solidified by shared purpose and mutual trust, had deepened into an unbreakable camaraderie. She was on the cusp of completing her advanced doctorate in applied geospatial intelligence, focusing on developing groundbreaking intelligent systems that could seamlessly integrate Elias's analog observation methods with cutting-edge digital mapping, drone analytics, and predictive AI. Her research aimed to create a holistic intelligence platform that could anticipate threats with unprecedented accuracy, much like Elias's own mind. She wasn't just inspired by Elias, she was a powerful intellectual force, a brilliant complement to his intuitive genius, bridging the gap between ancient wisdom and future technology. They often collaborated on highly sensitive, cross-border missions, their combined analytical prowess creating innovative solutions for complex global security challenges, from counterterrorism to disaster relief. They were a formidable duo, their bond strengthened by shared intellect, unwavering trust, and a mutual dedication to making a significant, tangible difference in the world. Lena was truly flourishing, having forged her own distinct path, yet one that complemented Elias's perfectly, a testament to her own courage, open-mindedness, and exceptional capabilities. Elias, deeply committed to paying his extraordinary success forward and ensuring that no soldier would again walk unknowingly into a similar, preventable trap, had established the Vance Protocol Academy for Strategic Environmental Intelligence. This groundbreaking military academy, an institution unlike any other, was funded by a consortium of forward-thinking defense organizations, international security alliances, and prominent philanthropic groups, including significant personal backing from Colonel Albright, now a fervent proponent of Elias's vision. The Academy's core mission was to train a new generation of military intelligence officers, scouts, and strategists. It specialized in Elias's unconventional methods, teaching cadets to read subtle environmental cues, to understand complex geological shifts, to interpret wildlife behavior as actionable intelligence, and to meticulously combine intuitive pattern recognition with rigorous scientific data. It was a holistic approach to understanding the battle space, viewing the environment not as a static backdrop, but as a dynamic, intelligent entity. He believed passionately that every soldier, regardless of rank, background, or conventional academic prowess, deserved to be equipped with the most comprehensive, nuanced understanding of their operational environment. The Academy provided state-of-the-art training facilities, cutting-edge analytical tools, and, crucially, extensive, immersive field exercises in diverse, challenging terrains across the globe, meticulously designed to mirror the very conditions where Elias had honed his skills. Elias himself spent considerable time lecturing at the Academy, his calm, authoritative presence inspiring awe and dedication in his students. He shared his personal story, recounting how his own ideas were once dismissed as cowardly suggestions and nervous ramblings, inspiring countless young minds to trust their instincts, to question conventional wisdom, and to pursue their passions for true understanding, no matter how unconventional or ridiculed they might initially seem. His old, battered notebook, once a symbol of his eccentricity and Thorne's contempt, was now a revered artifact, meticulously preserved in the Academy's prominent museum, encased in glass, a powerful, tangible testament to the quiet power of observation, the invaluable nature of intuition, and the dangerous, often tragic, cost of arrogance and closed-mindedness. The final, enduring image of Major Elias Vance was not of a man who had merely survived a tactical disaster, or even a triumphant officer basking in accolades. It was of him standing, silhouetted against a breathtaking sunset, on a high ridge overlooking a vast, newly established military training zone, a meticulously designed, diverse landscape engineered to mimic various global terrains, from arid deserts to dense jungles and snow-capped peaks. Below him, stretching into the distance, hundreds of cadets, young men and women from every background imaginable, meticulously charted the land, their faces intent, their movements precise as they followed Elias's unconventional instructions, learning not just to observe, but to truly listen to the earth. In his hand, he held not his old, worn notebook, but a sleek, modern military tablet, its screen displaying intricate, real-time holographic projections of terrain analysis, layered with environmental data he had personally coded and developed. He was no longer a solitary, misunderstood corporal, but a revered mentor, a visionary leader, a living symbol of wisdom, intuition, and courage, guiding a new generation. He looked at the vast, promising landscape, then at the earnest, inspired faces of his students, a profound sense of peace, deep satisfaction, and enduring accomplishment gracing his features. The man who had once been publicly mocked for his cowardly suggestions had not only transformed military intelligence, but had also fostered a new generation of strategic thinkers, proving that true foresight, no matter how quiet, no matter how unconventional, always finds its bloom and fundamentally alters the destiny of those who dare to listen. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path, even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.